The scorching July sun beat down mercilessly on Florissant, Missouri. As Daisy Sullivan stumbled through the dusty town square, her vision blurring at the edges. She had traveled for days to reach this frontier outpost, her savings nearly depleted and her strength fading with each step. The town's buildings wavered like mirages in the oppressive heat as Daisy clutched her small valise, her knuckles white with determination. She had come too far to falter now, but her body had other plans as the unrelenting summer of 1872 showed no mercy to newcomers unaccustomed to the brutal Midwestern heat. Ethan Lockwood observed the slender woman from the shade of the general store's awning, noting her fashionable yet impractical Eastern clothes and the increasingly unsteady nature of her gait. Something about her determination caught his attention, the way she held herself with dignity despite her obvious distress. When she suddenly staggered, dropping her bag as her knees buckled beneath her, Ethan was moving before conscious thought took hold. He crossed the square in long, purposeful strides, reaching her just as she crumpled toward the hard, packed dirt. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground, and the last thing Daisy registered before darkness claimed her was the concerned face of a sun-bronzed stranger and the gentle pressure of being lifted against a solid chest. "Miss, can you hear me?" The deep voice seemed to come from far away as Daisy struggled toward consciousness. She felt the blessed relief of shade and something cool pressed against her forehead. Her eyelids fluttered open to find herself lying on a wooden bench beneath the overhang of what appeared to be the town's small sheriff's office. A man knelt beside her, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair fell in waves beneath a well-worn Stetson, and concern etched lines around his mouth. "There you are," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Thought we might need to fetch the doctor." Daisy attempted to sit up, mortified by her predicament, but his hand gently pressed her shoulder. "Easy now. The heat's no trifling matter out here. I'm quite all right," she insisted, though her parched throat made her voice rasp unpleasantly. "Just a momentary weakness." A half-smile lifted one corner of his mouth as he offered her a tin cup of water. "Momentary weakness that had you dropping like a stone in the town square." His tone held no mockery, only matter-of-fact assessment. "Drink this, slowly." Daisy accepted the cup with trembling fingers, suddenly aware of the small crowd that had gathered nearby, curious onlookers whispering among themselves. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. "Thank you, Mr. Lockwood. Ethan Lockwood." He stood and tipped his hat. "Sheriff of Florissant, though most days that's more title than occupation." "Daisy Sullivan," she replied, sipping the water carefully. "I've just arrived from Boston." Ethan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Boston's a long way to travel alone, Miss Sullivan." "Mrs. Sullivan," she corrected automatically, the lie coming easily after so much practice. The gold band she still wore gleamed dully in the shadowed light. "I'm a widow." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, sympathy, perhaps, before he nodded. "My condolences. What brings you to our modest town?" Before Daisy could answer, a matronly woman pushed through the onlookers, her face set with determination. "For heaven's sake, Sheriff, the poor woman needs more than water and questions. She needs proper rest." The woman turned kind eyes toward Daisy. "I'm Martha Winters, dear. I run the boarding house just down the street." Martha's arrival dispersed the curious crowd as she took charge of the situation with practiced efficiency. "Can you stand, Mrs. Sullivan? My place is just yonder, and I have a cool room where you can recover properly." With Ethan's steady hand supporting her elbow, Daisy rose carefully to her feet. The world tilted alarmingly for a moment before steadying. "I'll see you both there safely," Ethan said, retrieving Daisy's valise from where someone had placed it nearby. No arguments, he added when Daisy opened her mouth to protest. The walk to the boarding house was mercifully short, though it seemed an eternity to Daisy's weakened body. Martha chatted comfortingly about nothing in particular, while Ethan's silent presence behind them felt oddly reassuring. The boarding house itself was a tidy two-story structure with a wide porch and white trim that stood out against weathered clapboard. "My best room is vacant," Martha announced as they entered the blessed coolness of the house. "First floor, so no stairs for you today. Used to be my parlor before I converted it for guests who can't manage steps." Daisy's protests about expense died on her lips as Martha ushered her into a pleasant room furnished with simple but well-kept pieces. A large window overlooked a small garden, its curtains drawn against the afternoon heat. "I can't afford," Daisy began weakly. "We'll discuss rates once you're rested," Martha interrupted firmly. "Sheriff, would you be so kind as to fetch Dr. Miller, just as a precaution?" Ethan nodded, setting Daisy's valise carefully by the door. "I'll return shortly." His eyes met Daisy's briefly. "Rest easy, Mrs. Sullivan. You're in good hands with Martha." After he departed, Martha helped Daisy remove her traveling clothes and change into a nightgown from her meager belongings. The older woman clucked disapprovingly at how little Daisy had brought with her, but made no comment beyond suggesting a cool bath later when Daisy felt stronger. Left alone at last, Daisy sank against the pillows, exhaustion claiming her almost immediately. Her last conscious thought was of storm-gray eyes and the surprising gentleness of a sheriff's calloused hands. When she woke, twilight had descended, casting the unfamiliar room in soft shadows. A lamp had been lit on the bedside table, and a tray with a covered plate sat nearby. Daisy struggled to sit up, her head clearer but her body still aching from days of travel and the heat's assault. A soft knock at the door preceded Martha's entrance. "Ah, you're awake. Good. Dr. Miller came by earlier but said to let you sleep." "Nothing serious," he said, "just exhaustion and the heat. Happens to plenty of newcomers." She bustled around the room, opening the window slightly to admit the cooler evening air. "There's chicken soup and bread there if you're feeling up to it." Daisy's stomach rumbled at the mention of food. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. You've been exceedingly kind to a stranger." Martha waved away her gratitude. "It's Martha, dear, and kindness costs nothing. Besides, any friend of Ethan's is welcome here." "The sheriff and I aren't acquainted," Daisy clarified. "He merely assisted me when I was unwell." Martha's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. "Ethan doesn't typically carry swooning ladies through town, nor sit vigil by their bedsides waiting for doctors." Heat that had nothing to do with the weather rose in Daisy's cheeks. "He stayed until the doctor arrived. Asked me to tell you he'll check on you tomorrow." Martha adjusted Daisy's pillows. "Now eat something, then more rest. We can talk about arrangements in the morning." After Martha left, Daisy ate sparingly of the simple but delicious meal, her mind turning over this new information. Why would the sheriff take such interest in her welfare? Perhaps it was merely part of his duties in this small town. Yet the memory of his concerned expression as he'd carried her to safety lingered. Morning brought clarity and renewed strength. Daisy bathed and dressed in her second-best dress, a serviceable blue cotton with minimal adornments, before venturing out of her room to find Martha in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for her boarders. "There she is," Martha said warmly. "Looking much improved. Come sit and have something to eat." Most of the other boarders have already gone about their business. Daisy took a seat at the large kitchen table, accepting a cup of strong coffee gratefully. "I must discuss payment with you, Martha. I haven't much money, but I can work." Martha raised a hand to stop her. "First things first. What brings a Boston widow all the way to Florissant, Missouri?" The directness of the question caught Daisy off guard. She had prepared a story, but facing Martha's kind but shrewd gaze, the carefully constructed tale seemed flimsy. Before she could formulate a response, another knock sounded at the back door. "That'll be Ethan," Martha said, rising to admit the sheriff. "Punctual as always when there's breakfast to be had." Ethan entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. He appeared momentarily surprised to see Daisy at the table but recovered quickly. "Mrs. Sullivan, good to see you upright and looking well." "Thanks to your assistance, Sheriff," Daisy replied, suddenly very aware of her simple appearance compared to yesterday's travel outfit. "I'm in your debt." "No debt necessary," he said, taking a seat opposite her as Martha placed a heaping plate before him. "Just doing my duty." Martha snorted softly. "Your duty, is it? Since when does your badge require carrying ladies through town?" Ethan's ears reddened slightly, though his expression remained composed. "Since decent folk help those in need, Martha, as you well know." Their easy familiarity spoke of long acquaintance, and Daisy wondered at their relationship. Martha seemed old enough to be Ethan's mother, though there was no particular resemblance between them. Martha set a plate in front of Daisy, eggs, bacon, and biscuits still steaming from the oven. "Eat up, both of you. Mrs. Sullivan and I were just about to discuss her reasons for coming to Florissant." Daisy tensed, but Ethan shook his head slightly. "If the lady wishes to keep her business private, that's her right." Grateful for his intervention, Daisy nevertheless recognized the need to provide some explanation. "I came seeking a fresh start," she said carefully. "My husband passed 6 months ago and Boston holds difficult memories." It wasn't entirely untrue, though Harold Sullivan had not been her husband, and his passing had been a blessed relief rather than a tragedy. The ring she wore had been her mother's, not a token of marriage. "I understand about difficult memories," Ethan said quietly, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to his breakfast. Something in his tone suggested personal experience with loss. Martha seemed satisfied with this partial explanation. "Well, you've come to the right place for new beginnings. Florissant's growing steadily since the railroad spur came through. Not as wild as towns further west, thank the Lord. Respectable folk mostly. You have any particular skills, Mrs. Sullivan?" Ethan asked. "Florissant could use a schoolteacher. Our last one married a farmer from Jefferson County and moved away." Daisy brightened. "I was a teacher in Boston before my marriage." This, at least, was true. "Though I have no formal certification for Missouri." "Mayor Thompson handles school matters," Ethan said. "I'd be happy to introduce you once you're fully recovered. Town council's been trying to find someone suitable for months." The prospect of employment so soon after arrival lifted a tremendous weight from Daisy's shoulders. "I would appreciate that greatly, Sheriff." "Ethan," he corrected with a small smile. "Everyone just calls me Ethan except when there's trouble." "Then you must call me Daisy," she replied, returning his smile hesitantly. Martha observed their exchange with poorly concealed interest. "Well then, that's settled. Daisy stays here until she's established, and Ethan introduces her to the mayor. Now, Sheriff, weren't you mentioning something about checking the north fence line at the Palmer place today?" Ethan nodded, finishing his coffee. "Old man Palmer thinks someone's been cutting his fence to rustle cattle. Probably just broke on its own, but I promised I'd look into it." He rose, settling his hat back on his head. "If you're feeling up to it, Mrs. Daisy, I could take you to meet Mayor Thompson tomorrow morning." "That would be most helpful, thank you." After Ethan departed, Martha refilled Daisy's coffee cup. "He's a good man," she said conversationally. "Been sheriff here for 5 years now. Came from somewhere back east originally, though he doesn't speak of it much." Daisy recognized the subtle fishing for information and kept her expression neutral. The town seems fortunate to have him. Never married, Martha continued, her tone deliberately casual as she began washing dishes. Not for lack of interest from local ladies, mind you. Just hasn't found the right one, he says. Martha, Daisy said gently, I hope you're not implying anything. I've only just arrived and I'm certainly not looking for. She trailed off, unsure how to finish without revealing too much. The older woman turned, her expression softening. Of course not, dear. Forgive an old woman's meddling. It's just rare to see Ethan take such immediate interest in anyone new to town. He was simply being kind, Daisy insisted. Martha nodded, though her eyes held a knowing gleam. Of course. Now, about your stay here, I could use help with the cooking and cleaning if you're willing, in exchange for room and board until the teaching position is settled. Relieved by the change of subject, Daisy agreed readily. I'm accustomed to household work and would be glad to earn my keep. The remainder of the day passed in domestic tasks as Martha showed Daisy around the boarding house and introduced her to the other residents, two elderly sisters who shared a room upstairs, a young clerk who worked at the bank, and a middle-aged man who drove the stagecoach that connected Florissant to larger towns along the railroad. All regarded the newcomer with polite curiosity, but none pressed for details about her past, for which Daisy was profoundly grateful. By evening, exhaustion from her recovery and the day's activities sent Daisy to bed early, though her sleep was fitful, disturbed by dreams of running through Boston's foggy streets, pursued by an unseen threat. She woke before dawn, heart racing, the phantom sensation of hands closing around her throat fading slowly as reality reasserted itself. The safety of her small room in Florissant seemed fragile suddenly, a temporary haven that could dissolve with a single telegram from the east. Daisy rose and moved to the window, drawing aside the curtain to watch as the first pale light of dawn crept over the town. She had come so far, risked so much. Would it be enough? The day dawned clear and promised heat, though nothing like the scorching temperature that had felled her upon arrival. Daisy dressed with care in her best remaining dress, a dove gray with navy trim that had once belonged to her sister. Her hair, usually worn in a simple knot at her nape, she arranged more carefully, aware that first impressions with the mayor would matter greatly for her prospects. Martha approved her appearance with a nod as Daisy entered the kitchen. Very proper. Mayor Thompson's wife sets great store by appearances. She'll have a say in whether you get the position, make no mistake. Ethan arrived promptly at 9, dressed in clean clothes with his badge pinned to his vest and his usual hat held in his hands. He hesitated briefly upon seeing Daisy, something like admiration flickering in his eyes before his expression returned to its usual calm reserve. "Good morning," he greeted both women. Ready to meet the mayor, the walk to the mayor's house took them through the heart of Florissant. In the clear light of morning, Daisy could better appreciate the town than she had upon her arrival. Though small, it showed signs of prosperity: sturdy buildings, clean streets, a small park with benches where several women sat chatting while children played nearby. It was worlds away from Boston's crowded neighborhoods and the constant grime of a major port city. Florissant was founded in the 1780s by French settlers, Ethan explained as they walked. The name means flowering in French. Towns changed hands a few times since then, Spanish for a while, then back to French before the Louisiana Purchase brought it under American control. "You know your local history," Daisy observed, surprised by his knowledge. He shrugged. "Figure a sheriff ought to know the place he's sworn to protect. Besides, old Reverend Carter loves telling anyone who'll listen about the town's past. He's something of an amateur historian." They passed a small white church with a modest steeple, and Ethan nodded toward it. That's where you'd be teaching, in the church annex. School board can't afford a separate building yet. It looks charming, Daisy said sincerely. The simple structure reminded her of the rural Connecticut schoolhouse where she had first taught, before moving to Boston. Mayor Thompson's house stood on a corner lot at the edge of town, a two-story affair, with a wraparound porch and elaborate gingerbread trim that spoke of the owner's prosperity and importance. A woman in a fashionable morning dress was arranging flowers in the front garden and straightened as they approached. "Sheriff Lockwood," she called, removing her gardening gloves. "What a pleasant surprise! And you've brought a visitor, Mrs. Thompson. This is Mrs. Daisy Sullivan, recently arrived from Boston," Ethan introduced them. "Daisy, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, our mayor's wife." Eleanor Thompson was perhaps 50, with carefully coiffed gray-streaked hair and shrewd eyes that assessed Daisy thoroughly. "Boston, how interesting. We don't get many Easterners choosing Florissant deliberately. Most are just passing through to more exciting destinations." "I find Florissant quite charming," Daisy replied diplomatically. "Sheriff Lockwood mentioned you might be seeking a school teacher." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indeed we are. Are you qualified, Mrs. Sullivan?" "I taught for 3 years in Connecticut and 2 in Boston before my marriage," Daisy said, the partial truth coming easily. "I'm a widow now, seeking a fresh start." Something in Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "I see. Well, come inside, both of you. Edward is in his study. He'll want to hear about this." Mayor Edward Thompson proved to be a portly, jovial man with a businessman's acumen beneath his friendly demeanor. He questioned Daisy thoroughly about her educational background, teaching philosophy and experience with different age groups. To her relief, he seemed more interested in her capabilities than her personal history, accepting her status as a widow without pressing for details. "References?" he asked finally, leaning back in his leather chair. Daisy tensed. This was the weak point in her application. She had fled Boston without securing proper letters, and contacting her former employers risked revealing her whereabouts. "I'm afraid my departure from Boston was rather sudden, following my husband's passing," she said carefully. "I have none with me, though I could write to request them." Mayor Thompson frowned slightly, but before he could respond, Ethan spoke from his position by the study door. "I believe Mrs. Winters has already formed a favorable impression of Mrs. Sullivan, and her judgment carries weight in this town, as does mine." His tone was respectful but firm. "I'm willing to vouch for her character, having observed her conduct since arrival." The mayor glanced between them, a speculative look crossing his features. "Indeed. Well, Martha Winters doesn't suffer fools gladly, that's certain." He drummed his fingers on his desk thoughtfully. "The school term begins in 4 weeks. The position pays $30 monthly, with accommodations provided in the rooms above the school annex if desired." Hope surged in Daisy's chest. "That would be more than adequate, Mayor Thompson." "Very well. We'll arrange a 1-month trial beginning with the new term. If the school board is satisfied with your performance, the position becomes permanent." He extended his hand, which Daisy shook gratefully. "Welcome to Florissant, Mrs. Sullivan." As they departed the Thompson residence, Daisy could scarcely contain her elation. "Thank you," she said fervently once they were out of earshot. "Your endorsement made all the difference." Ethan looked somewhat embarrassed by her gratitude. "Just stated the truth as I see it. You carry yourself like an educated woman, and Martha's a good judge of character." They walked in companionable silence for a few moments before Ethan spoke again. "There's a social at the church Saturday evening. Might be a good opportunity for you to meet more of the townspeople before school begins." He cleared his throat. I'd be happy to escort you if you're amenable. The invitation caught Daisy by surprise. Oh, I wouldn't want to impose, it's no imposition, he assured her quickly. Just neighborly, help you get acquainted with folks. Despite her reservations about drawing attention to herself, Daisy recognized the practical benefits of establishing herself within the community. And something about Ethan's steady presence made her feel safer than she had in months. That's very kind. I would appreciate the introduction. His smile transformed his serious face, reaching his eyes and revealing a dimple in one cheek that Daisy found unexpectedly charming. Good. I'll call for you at 7 if that suits. As they neared the boarding house, Daisy was struck by how rapidly her circumstances had changed. Just 2 days ago, she had arrived in Florissant with nothing but desperate hope and dwindling funds. Now she had accommodation, the promise of employment, and perhaps even the beginnings of friendship. It seemed almost too fortunate, leaving her waiting for the inevitable complication that would destroy this fragile new beginning. The days leading up to the social passed swiftly, as Daisy settled into a routine at Martha's boarding house. She helped prepare meals, tended the small vegetable garden behind the house, and assisted with laundry tasks that left her pleasantly tired by evening and allowed little time for the darker thoughts that had plagued her journey west. Ethan stopped by each day, ostensibly to check on her recovery but lingering for coffee or conversation whenever his duties permitted. Through these visits, Daisy learned fragments of his own story, how he had come to Missouri after the war, served as a deputy in St. Louis before accepting the sheriff's position in Florissant, his friendship with Martha, whose late husband had been the previous sheriff. In turn, she shared carefully edited tales of her teaching experiences, her childhood in a small Connecticut town, her love of literature. She skirted questions about Boston and her late husband, changing the subject whenever conversation veered too close to dangerous territory. If Ethan noticed these evasions, he made no comment, respecting her apparent reluctance to discuss painful memories. By Saturday, Daisy had begun to relax her vigilance slightly, lulled by the peaceful rhythm of small-town life and the absence of any sign she had been followed. She even allowed herself a small extravagance, purchasing ribbon to refresh her best dress for the social from the town's modest general store. "That shade of blue suits you," Martha commented as Daisy prepared for the evening, pinning the last strands of her honey-brown hair into a simple but elegant arrangement. "Brings out the color in your eyes." Daisy smiled at her reflection, hardly recognizing the composed woman who looked back at her. The haunted, fearful expression that had shadowed her features for so long had begun to fade, replaced by cautious hope. "Thank you for all your kindness, Martha. I don't know what would have become of me if—" "Hush now," Martha interrupted gently. "We all need help sometimes. My Jack always said the measure of a town is how it treats strangers in need." She patted Daisy's shoulder. "Besides, you've more than earned your keep this week." Never seen the kitchen floor so spotless. A knock at the front door announced Ethan's arrival precisely at 7. Martha hurried to answer while Daisy drew a deep breath, unexpectedly nervous. She had attended countless social functions in Boston, yet none had left her with the flutter of anticipation she felt now. Ethan stood in the hallway, hat in hand, dressed in a clean dark suit that transformed him from frontier lawman to respectable gentleman. His eyes widened appreciatively as Daisy emerged from her room. "You look lovely," he said simply, the sincerity in his tone warming her more than elaborate compliments would have. "Thank you. You're very handsome yourself." The words slipped out before she could censor them, bringing color to her cheeks. Martha beamed at them both. Don't keep her out too late, Sheriff. And mind you introduce her to Reverend Carter first thing, he'll be offended otherwise. The church social proved to be a far cry from Boston's formal gatherings. The church annex had been transformed with paper lanterns and wildflowers. Tables laden with home-cooked dishes lined one wall, and a small group of local musicians played lively tunes that had several couples dancing in the cleared center of the room. True to his word, Ethan introduced Daisy to dozens of townspeople, each greeting her with varying degrees of curiosity and welcome. Reverend Carter, a white-haired man with kind eyes and a scholar's demeanor, engaged her in a lengthy discussion of educational philosophy, clearly pleased by her thoughtful responses. Mrs. Carter, a tiny woman with boundless energy, promised to show Daisy around the schoolroom the following week. "You've made quite an impression," Ethan observed as they finally secured plates of food and found seats at a corner table. Reverend Carter's approval carries weight with the school board. "He seems a man of genuine intellect," Daisy said. "I was afraid the position might require more religious instruction than academic." "Florissant values education," Ethan replied. "The Reverend believes knowledge and faith complement each other rather than conflict." As they ate, Daisy found herself studying Ethan when he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled, the careful way he listened when others spoke. There was a steadiness to him that she found increasingly attractive, a quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. After they finished eating, Ethan hesitated before asking, "Would you care to dance, if it's not too soon after your loss?" Daisy's fictional widowhood momentarily confounded her before she recovered. "I think some light-hearted enjoyment would be welcome, though I warn you, I may be out of practice." His hand was warm and solid as he led her to the dance floor, and when his arm circled her waist for the lively reel, Daisy found herself relaxing into his guidance. They moved well together, Ethan proving to be a surprisingly graceful dancer despite his imposing build. By the end of the second dance, Daisy was flushed and laughing, momentarily free of the burden of secrets and fear she had carried for so long. As the evening progressed, she noticed several young women watching Ethan with undisguised interest, confirming Martha's comment about his status as one of Florissant's most eligible bachelors. The realization brought an unexpected pang of something that felt disconcertingly like jealousy. "Would you like some punch?" Ethan asked as the musicians paused between sets. "Yes, thank you." As he moved toward the refreshment table, Daisy found herself approached by a well-dressed woman perhaps a few years her senior. "Mrs. Sullivan, isn't it? I'm Rebecca Palmer. My husband owns the largest cattle operation north of town." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I see you've captured our sheriff's attention quite thoroughly." The woman's tone contained a subtle barb that Daisy chose to ignore. "Sheriff Lockwood has been kind enough to introduce me around, as I'm to be the new school teacher." "Indeed?" Rebecca raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. "How fortunate for Florissant to secure a qualified teacher so quickly, and a widow, I understand, from Boston." Something in the woman's pointed questions raised Daisy's guard. "Yes, though I'm looking forward rather than back now." "A sensible approach. The past has a way of finding us regardless, don't you think?" Before Daisy could formulate a response to this unsettling observation, Ethan returned with 2 cups of punch. He nodded politely to Rebecca. "Mrs. Palmer, enjoying the evening?" "Immensely. I was just becoming acquainted with our new school teacher." Rebecca's smile turned saccharine. "Such an interesting background she must have. Boston society is so refined." "Daisy will be an asset to our community," Ethan said firmly, a hint of steel beneath his courteous tone. Her credentials impressed the mayor considerably. Rebecca inclined her head slightly. No doubt. Well, I should rejoin my husband. Lovely meeting you, Mrs. Sullivan. I'm sure we'll have many opportunities to become better acquainted. As she departed, Daisy released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She seemed intense. Ethan handed her a cup of punch, his expression rueful. Rebecca Palmer considers herself the arbiter of Florissant society, takes a particular interest in newcomers, especially women. She's interested in you, Daisy observed, surprising herself with her directness. He looked genuinely startled. Rebecca, no, she's happily married to Richard Palmer. Not for herself, Daisy clarified. She was assessing me as potential competition, I think. Understanding dawned on Ethan's face, followed by discomfort. Ah, she's been trying to match me with her younger sister for the past year. He shook his head. Some folks can't abide a man being content on his own. And are you? Daisy asked, curiosity overcoming prudence. Content on your own. Ethan's gaze met hers, something unreadable in its depths. I have been, until recently. The simple statement hung between them, charged with implication, until the musicians struck up another tune, breaking the moment. Would you like to dance again? Ethan asked, offering his hand. Daisy should have declined. She should have maintained careful distance, remembered that her presence in Florissant might well be temporary, that any attachment formed would be built on a foundation of half-truths and omissions. Instead, she placed her hand in his. I'd like that very much. They danced twice more before Daisy noticed she was drawing curious glances from many of the townspeople. Public scrutiny was the last thing she needed, and reluctantly she suggested they might depart. The walk back to Martha's boarding house was pleasantly cool after the warmth of the crowded church annex. Stars scattered across the clear Missouri sky in dazzling profusion, and the nearly full moon illuminated their path with silver light. I haven't seen stars like this since I was a child, Daisy remarked, gazing upward. In Boston, the city lights and fog obscure all but the brightest. One of the compensations for simpler living, Ethan said, following her gaze. There's a clarity out here that cities lack. The double meaning wasn't lost on Daisy, and guilt pricked at her conscience. This good man deserved honesty, not the carefully constructed persona she presented. Yet telling the truth would risk everything: her safety, her fresh start, perhaps even her life. They reached Martha's porch too soon, and Daisy turned to face Ethan, suddenly shy. Thank you for a lovely evening, it was. I can't remember when I last enjoyed myself so thoroughly. The pleasure was mine, he replied, his voice low and warm in the darkness. Perhaps we might attend next month's social together as well. Hope and fear warred within her. By next month's social, her trial period as teacher would be nearly complete, her position in Florissant more secure, or she might be forced to flee again if her past caught up with her. I'd like that, she said finally, choosing hope over caution. Ethan hesitated, then bent slowly, giving her ample time to step away if she wished. When she remained still, he pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek, his breath warm against her skin. Good night, Daisy. Good night, Ethan, she whispered, her heart hammering in her chest as she watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the night. Inside, Martha waited up despite the late hour, eager for details that Daisy provided in carefully edited form. She omitted the moment on the dance floor when Ethan's hand at her waist had sent warmth spreading through her body. The way his eyes had followed her movements throughout the evening, the tender goodnight that still lingered on her cheek. Later, lying in bed, Daisy stared at the ceiling, conflicting emotions churning within her. She had come to Florissant seeking anonymity and safety, not connection, certainly not the stirrings of attraction she felt toward Ethan Lockwood. Involvement with the town sheriff, the very person most likely to receive any telegrams about a woman matching her description, was perhaps the most foolhardy choice she could make. Yet denying the growing attraction seemed equally impossible. For the first time in over a year, she had experienced genuine happiness, felt truly seen by another person rather than merely surviving. The prospect of relinquishing that newfound joy seemed unbearable. "It's too soon," she whispered to the darkness. "Too dangerous." But her heart, so long constrained by fear, refused to heed caution's warning. The following weeks passed in a blur of preparation for the school term. Daisy threw herself into readying the classroom, reviewing the limited textbooks available, and developing lessons for students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. The work was familiar and deeply satisfying, providing structure and purpose that helped quiet her persistent anxieties. Ethan remained a steady presence, stopping by the schoolhouse to help move heavy furniture or install new slate boards, joining her for supper at Martha's table several evenings each week, escorting her to Sunday services, where she met more of her future pupils and their parents. Their interactions remained proper but increasingly comfortable, marked by shared humor and growing understanding. "You've transformed this place," Ethan remarked 4 days before classes were to begin, surveying the now orderly schoolroom with its freshly scrubbed floors, neatly arranged desks, and educational charts covering previously bare walls. "The children will be fortunate to learn here." Daisy smiled, pleased by his approval. "It's still lacking so much. The library consists of barely 24 books, half of them Bibles. The maps are outdated, showing territories that became states years ago." "Progress comes slowly to small towns," Ethan acknowledged. "But I've noticed Mayor Thompson and the Reverend seem increasingly impressed with your initiatives. I suspect the school budget might see an increase if your first term goes well." "If," Daisy repeated, her smile fading slightly. Despite her efforts to integrate into Florissant society, she remained acutely aware of her precarious position. The monthly mail coach had arrived yesterday, bringing newspapers and correspondence from larger cities. Each delivery renewed her fear of discovery. Ethan studied her face, perceiving her sudden shift in mood with the perceptiveness that both comforted and unsettled her. "You'll succeed here, Daisy. The town already respects you. I hope you're right." She busied herself arranging primers on the front desk, avoiding his gaze. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," he said after a moment, his tone carefully casual. "The Harvest Festival is in 2 weeks. It's the biggest celebration of the year in Florissant: dancing, feasting, games for the children. I thought perhaps—" He paused, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I thought you might accompany me, as my guest specifically." Daisy looked up, finding Ethan watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Your guest?" "Yes." He took a step closer. "Not as the new school teacher being shown around town, but as a woman whose company I've come to value greatly." The distinction was clear, his intent unmistakable. This was no longer about neighborly assistance, but something far more personal. Daisy's heart raced as she realized they stood at a crossroads: continue as friendly acquaintances or acknowledge the deepening connection between them. Prudence dictated she decline, maintain distance, protect her secrets. Instead, she heard herself say, "I would be honored, Ethan." His smile was worth the risk, transforming his serious features and warming his gray eyes. "Thank you, that's very good news." A sound at the schoolroom door broke the moment Rebecca Palmer stood in the entrance, her expression suggesting she had witnessed their exchange. "Mrs. Sullivan, Sheriff, I hope I'm not interrupting." Mrs. Palmer, Daisy acknowledged, moving slightly away from Ethan. What brings you to the schoolhouse? The ladies' auxiliary is organizing refreshments for opening day, Rebecca explained, glancing between them with poorly concealed interest. I wanted to confirm you'll be present for the ceremony. Of course, Daisy assured her. I'm looking forward to meeting all the students and their families officially. Excellent. Sheriff, I believe my husband was looking for you earlier, something about strays on the north pasture again. Ethan nodded, his professional demeanor returning. I'll ride out there this afternoon. He turned to Daisy. Until tomorrow, Mrs. Sullivan. After he departed, Rebecca's pretense of official business dropped away. You've made quite an impression on our sheriff, she observed, moving further into the classroom. He's not typically so, attentive to newcomers. Daisy kept her expression neutral. Sheriff Lockwood has been kind to everyone I've observed him interact with. It seems part of his character. Indeed. Rebecca trailed her gloved fingers along a desk edge. Still, one wonders what particularly draws him to a widow from so far away. Ethan is usually more cautious in his associations. The implication was clear, and Daisy felt her spine stiffen. If you have a question about my character or background, Mrs. Palmer, perhaps you should ask directly rather than insinuate. Rebecca's eyebrows rose at this direct challenge. Forgive me. Small towns breed curiosity, especially when someone arrives with so little history provided. For instance, which part of Boston did you reside in? My cousin lived there several years and might have known your family. Beacon Hill, though only after my marriage, Daisy replied smoothly, the fabrication coming easily after weeks of practice. Before that, I taught at the Gardner School for Girls near the Common. And your late husband's occupation, banking, though I fail to see the relevance of these details to the ladies' auxiliaries' refreshments. Rebecca smiled thinly, merely making conversation. Ethan is well respected in Florissant. Many of us feel protective of him, especially after his previous disappointment. This was new information, and despite herself, Daisy's curiosity was piqued. Previous disappointment. Oh, has he not mentioned Clara? Rebecca's tone suggested feigned surprise. They were engaged some years ago, before she left him for a railroad executive with better prospects. Devastated him completely. He's been quite reserved with ladies ever since until your arrival. The revelation disturbed Daisy more than she cared to admit. Not the fact of a prior engagement that was hardly surprising for a man of Ethan's age and qualities, but that he had never mentioned such a significant event, despite their many conversations. It reminded her sharply that she wasn't the only one with secrets. Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Palmer, Daisy said evenly. But Sheriff Lockwood and I are quite capable of managing our own acquaintance without community oversight. Rebecca's smile turned cold. Of course. I merely thought you should be fully informed. Small towns have long memories, Mrs. Sullivan, and little tolerance for those who cause pain to respected members of the community. Good day. After she departed, Daisy sank into her chair, disturbed by the encounter. Rebecca Palmer clearly considered her an interloper, perhaps even a threat to the established social order of Florissant. Such scrutiny increased the danger of her position significantly. More troubling was the information about Ethan's past heartbreak. Was his interest in her merely the first stirring of recovery from that disappointment, or something more substantial? And what right had she to encourage his attention when she kept so much of herself hidden? These questions plagued her through the remainder of the day and into the evening as she prepared for the school term's commencement. By morning, she had resolved to maintain stricter boundaries with Ethan, regardless of her growing feelings. The Harvest Festival would be their last social engagement, until she felt secure enough to share at least some version of the truth with him. The first day of school arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp morning air softening to pleasant warmth by midday. The entire town seemed to have turned out for the occasion. Parents and children gathering in the churchyard, where Reverend Carter would offer a blessing before classes officially began. Daisy stood on the schoolhouse steps, wearing her most professional attire, a high-necked shirtwaist and dark skirt that emphasized her role as educator rather than her femininity. Her hair was pinned severely back, and she carried her mother's old Bible as both prop and talisman. Mayor Thompson made a brief speech about the importance of education, followed by Reverend Carter's prayer for a productive term. Parents then presented their children to Daisy, one by one, 23 pupils in total, ranging from shy 6-year-old twins to a hulking 16-year-old boy who seemed mortified to be there at all. Ethan stood at the edge of the gathering, his presence both reassuring and distracting. When their eyes met briefly across the churchyard, the warmth in his gaze nearly undid Daisy's resolve to maintain distance. The day passed in a whirlwind of assessments and organization, as Daisy determined each child's educational level and assigned appropriate reading materials. By afternoon, she had established preliminary groupings and begun basic arithmetic lessons with the younger children, while the older students worked on composition exercises. When the final bell rang, releasing the children to waiting parents, Daisy felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. Teaching had always been her passion, the profession she had been forced to abandon in Boston. Reclaiming it felt like recovering a vital piece of herself. "Impressive first day," Ethan commented, appearing in the doorway after the last child departed. Even young Jacob Miller paid attention, which his father assures me is unprecedented. Daisy smiled, gathering her notes. "Jacob is bright but bored. He needs more challenging material." "You determined that in one day." "It's my job to understand my students," she replied. Jacob completed his arithmetic exercises in half the time allotted, then spent the remainder drawing remarkably detailed diagrams of steam engines in his copybook. He has an engineer's mind trapped in a farming community. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, studying her with undisguised admiration. "Florissant is fortunate to have you, Daisy Sullivan." The use of her assumed name jarred her momentarily, a sharp reminder of the deception that underlay their growing connection. "Thank you, but I'm merely doing what any competent teacher would." "I doubt that very much." He straightened, seemingly sensing her withdrawal. "I should let you finish here. Martha mentioned you'd promised to help with dinner preparations." "Yes, she's expecting extra boarders on the evening stagecoach." Daisy busied herself arranging papers, avoiding his gaze. "I should go." Ethan stepped aside to let her pass, but spoke as she reached the door. "Rebecca Palmer came to see you yesterday." It wasn't a question, but Daisy nodded. "She did. Whatever she told you about me, it's not my place to pry into your past, Ethan," Daisy interrupted gently. "Nor would I usually discuss it," he said quietly. "But if Rebecca was true to form, she mentioned Clara." Daisy hesitated, then admitted, "She did." He sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair in a gesture she had come to recognize as signaling discomfort. "Clara Beaumont and I were engaged briefly, 5 years ago. She left Florissant when a better prospect appeared. It was difficult at the time, but not the devastating heartbreak Rebecca likely described." "You don't owe me explanations," Daisy said, though relief flooded her at his willingness to share this piece of his history. "Perhaps not. But I'd rather you hear the truth from me than Rebecca's embellished version." He met her eyes directly. "I value honesty, Daisy, between friends especially. The pointed remark struck uncomfortably close to her own deception, and Daisy looked away. As do I. Which is why I should mention that perhaps we should be more circumspect in our association, at least until my position here is secure. Rebecca seemed concerned about your attention to a newcomer. Disappointment flickered across Ethan's features before he controlled his expression. Rebecca Palmer has no say in my personal affairs, nor does anyone else in Florissant. But if you prefer more distance, I'll respect your wishes. Just until after the school board's review, Daisy clarified, already regretting the suggestion but knowing it was necessary. The harvest festival notwithstanding. He nodded, his formal manner returning. As you wish, Mrs. Sullivan. Good afternoon. Watching him walk away, Daisy felt a pang of loss that seemed disproportionate to their brief acquaintance. In just weeks, Ethan Lockwood had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated and couldn't afford, yet couldn't seem to prevent either. The following days established a pattern of dedicated teaching and careful distance. Daisy immersed herself in her pupils' education, developing individualized approaches for each child's needs. Parents began stopping by after school to express appreciation for her methods, and even Rebecca Palmer grudgingly acknowledged her son's improved interest in his studies. True to his word, Ethan maintained a respectful distance, limiting their interactions to polite greetings when they encountered each other in town. Daisy told herself this was for the best, even as she found herself watching for his tall figure whenever she ventured from the schoolhouse or Martha's boarding house. Martha, observant as ever, noted the change but made no direct comment until nearly a week had passed. As they prepared supper together one evening, she finally broached the subject. "Did you and Ethan have a disagreement? He hasn't joined us for meals lately." Daisy concentrated on kneading bread dough, avoiding Martha's perceptive gaze. "No disagreement. I simply felt it best to establish myself as the schoolteacher before forming too many personal attachments." Martha snorted softly. "Nonsense. You're worried about what people like Rebecca Palmer might say." "Perhaps with reason," Daisy countered. "My position here is still probationary." "Child, if you think Mayor Thompson would dismiss the finest teacher this town has seen in a decade because of gossip about your friendship with the sheriff, you understand very little about Florissant." Martha set down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. "Or is it something else you're afraid of?" The question hit too close to Daisy's deeper fears, and she remained silent, focusing on shaping the bread loaf. Martha sighed. "I've lived long enough to recognize when someone's running from something, Daisy. Whatever brought you to Florissant, whatever you're hiding from it, doesn't define who you are now." Tears pricked at Daisy's eyes and she blinked them back. "You don't know what I've done." "I know what you're doing," Martha replied gently. "Teaching children who need education, helping a lonely old woman manage her boarding house, bringing light into a town that's better for your presence. That tells me more about your character than whatever past you're concealing." Before Daisy could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Men's voices called urgently, and heavy footsteps crossed the porch. Martha hurried to open the door, revealing two men supporting a third between them, Ethan, his face pale beneath a gash that bled freely down his temple. "Lord have mercy," Martha exclaimed. "What happened?" "Ambush," one of the men explained as they half-carried Ethan inside. "Checking that fence line at Palmer's North pasture when someone took a shot at him. Bullet just grazed him, but he took a bad fall from his horse." Daisy froze momentarily at the sight of Ethan's blood-streaked face before instinct took over. "Bring him to the kitchen." "Martha, we need hot water and clean cloths. Do you have any whiskey?" Martha nodded, already moving toward a cabinet. "In the pantry. Medical kits there too." They settled Ethan in a kitchen chair where he slumped forward, clearly dazed but conscious. "I'm fine," he muttered, attempting to stand before the men pushed him back down. "Just caught me by surprise." "Stay still," Daisy ordered, her voice firmer than she felt as she accepted the medical supplies Martha thrust into her hands. Fear gripped her heart, but years of managing classroom emergencies had taught her to function despite panic. "Gentlemen, thank you for bringing him. Has someone sent for Dr. Miller?" "He's out at the Harrison farm," one man replied. "Delivering a baby. Won't be back until morning." Daisy nodded, assessing the wound with forced clinical detachment. The bullet had indeed merely grazed Ethan's temple, but the resulting fall had left him with a large bruise forming along his jawline and what appeared to be a dislocated shoulder. "Martha, I'll need your help, and some privacy." The men departed reluctantly after extracting promises to be informed of the sheriff's condition by morning. Once they were gone, Daisy began cleaning the head wound carefully, revealing a shallow furrow that bled profusely as head injuries tend to do but would likely heal cleanly. "Who would want to shoot you?" she asked quietly as she worked. Ethan winced as the cloth touched the raw wound. "Probably the same people who have been rustling Palmer's cattle. They've gotten bolder lately." "You shouldn't have been out there alone," she chided, reaching for the whiskey Martha had provided. "Didn't expect trouble in broad daylight," he hissed as she poured a measure of alcohol over the wound. "Damn, that stings." "Language, Sheriff," Martha admonished, though her worried expression belied her stern tone. "Daisy, his shoulder needs tending too." Daisy nodded, having already noted the awkward angle of Ethan's right arm. "I need to examine your shoulder. Can you remove your shirt?" Under different circumstances, the request might have been improper, but necessity overrode convention. Martha helped ease the garment from his injured side while Daisy supported his arm, trying to ignore the inappropriate awareness of his bare skin beneath her hands. The shoulder was indeed dislocated, swollen and already darkening with bruising. Daisy had seen such injuries before her brother had suffered similar dislocations playing rugby at university. "This needs to be reset before the swelling worsens," she said, meeting Ethan's pained gaze. "It will hurt considerably." "Do what you must," he replied, trust evident in his eyes despite the pain clouding them. Martha positioned herself behind Ethan's chair, gripping his good shoulder firmly. "Ready when you are." Daisy took a deep breath, positioning herself at his injured side. "Drink some whiskey first," she advised, offering the bottle. "It won't dull the pain much, but every little helps." Ethan took several swallows of the amber liquid, grimacing. "Proceed, Mrs. Sullivan." The use of her formal name despite their intimate circumstances almost made Daisy smile. "On 3. 1, 2. She moved on 2 rather than 3, a trick her brother's doctor had employed, grasping Ethan's wrist and forearm to manipulate the joint with a sharp, practiced motion. Ethan's strangled groan as the shoulder popped back into its socket tore at Daisy's heart, but the worst was over in seconds. His breathing ragged, he sagged against the chair, sweat beading his forehead. "Remind me never to play cards with you," he managed after a moment. "You cheat at counting." "A necessary deception," Daisy replied, relief making her voice unsteady as she began fashioning a sling from a clean dish towel. "The anticipation is often worse than the event." Once the sling was secured, and the head wound bandaged, Martha insisted Ethan take her late husband's room for the night, rather than return to his quarters above the sheriff's office. Too exhausted to argue, he acquiesced, allowing the women to help him to the small bedroom off the kitchen that Martha kept ready but rarely used. "I'll sit with him for a while," Daisy volunteered once they had settled Ethan on the narrow bed. in case fever develops from the wound. Martha gave her a knowing look but nodded. Call if you need me. I'll finish supper and save you both plates for later. Left alone with Ethan, Daisy pulled a chair beside the bed and dampened a fresh cloth to bathe his face, which still bore traces of blood and dirt from the attack. He watched her through half-closed eyes, the whiskey and pain having left him languid but awake. "This wasn't how I imagined getting you to fuss over me," he murmured, a hint of his usual humor returning despite his battered condition. "I'm not fussing, I'm providing basic medical attention," Daisy corrected, though her gentle ministrations belied the practical tone. "You should rest. Will you stay?" The vulnerability in the question caught at Daisy's heart. "Yes," she promised softly. "I'll be right here." His eyes drifted closed, tension gradually leaving his features as sleep claimed him. Daisy continued her vigil, periodically checking for signs of fever and adjusting the light blanket Martha had provided. In repose, Ethan's face appeared younger, the lines of responsibility smoothed away, and Daisy found herself studying him with a tenderness that frightened her in its intensity. The evening deepened into night as Martha brought food that Daisy barely touched, too preoccupied with monitoring Ethan's condition. When he stirred restlessly in the early hours, mumbling incoherently as fever began to take hold, she bathed his face and neck with cool water, speaking soothingly until he settled again. By dawn, the fever had broken, and Ethan woke lucid though obviously still in pain. He seemed momentarily disoriented to find Daisy dozing in the chair beside him, her hand still resting lightly on his arm. "You stayed all night," he observed, his voice rough with sleep. Daisy straightened, self-conscious but unwilling to move away entirely. "I promised I would. Thank you." The simple words carried weight beyond mere gratitude for nursing. Dr. Miller arrived mid-morning, having been summoned upon his return to town. He examined Ethan thoroughly, pronouncing Daisy's treatment of both injuries professionally executed and prescribing several days of rest before resuming limited duties. "You're fortunate Mrs. Sullivan knew how to reset that shoulder," the doctor commented as he repacked his bag. "Seen men crippled for life when such injuries are mishandled." "Where did you learn such skills?" Ethan asked after the doctor departed, genuinely curious. Daisy hesitated, then offered a piece of truth. "My brother dislocated his shoulder regularly playing rugby. I assisted the doctor enough times to learn the procedure." "You never mentioned having a brother." Another truth slipped out before caution could prevent it. "He died in the war, at Antietam." Understanding and sympathy filled Ethan's expression. "I'm sorry, Daisy. The war took too many good men." The genuine compassion in his voice nearly undid her careful composure. For a moment, Daisy was tempted to tell him everything about Thomas's death that had left her father broken, about her mother's subsequent decline, about Harold Sullivan and the terrible bargain she had made in desperation, about her flight west. The words rose in her throat but remained unspoken. Not yet. Not until she was certain. Instead, she squeezed his hand gently. "You should rest more. Martha will have my head if I exhaust you with conversation." Ethan's fingers curled around hers, preventing her immediate withdrawal. What happened to maintaining distance? "Nearly being killed tends to alter priorities," Daisy admitted ruefully. "I've been foolish, haven't I?" "Cautious," he corrected. "Which is your right, but I've missed your company these past days." The simple admission warmed her. "And I yours." "Though I'm not sure." "The Harvest Festival," he interrupted, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "I still wish you to accompany me if you're willing." Daisy knew she should decline. That encouraging deeper attachment was unwise given her uncertain future. Yet the events of the night had crystallized something within her, the recognition that life's fragility made caution a poor substitute for connection. "Yes," she said finally, "I'd like that very much." His smile was worth any risk, and Daisy found herself returning it without reservation. Whatever complications the future might hold in this moment, the choice felt right. Ethan's recovery proceeded steadily over the following days. Though confined to light duties at the sheriff's office, he managed to coordinate the investigation into the shooting with his deputy's assistance. No culprit was immediately identified, though suspicion fell on a gang of rustlers who had been targeting ranches throughout the county. Daisy continued her teaching duties while checking on Ethan each evening, often bringing supper from Martha's kitchen to share in the small office behind the jail. These quiet meals became a cherished routine, allowing them to become better acquainted without the town's watchful eyes upon them. During these conversations, Ethan shared more of his history, his childhood in Pennsylvania, his service in the Union Army during the war, his decision to seek a different life afterward. In turn, Daisy offered carefully selected truths about her own past, focusing on her teaching experiences and Connecticut childhood rather than the more recent Boston chapters. As the Harvest Festival approached, Daisy found herself anticipating the event with unaccustomed excitement. Martha insisted on helping her prepare a new dress for the occasion, adapting a pattern from Godey's Lady's Book with fabric ordered from St. Louis. The result was a gown of deep burgundy that complemented Daisy's honey-brown hair and hazel eyes while remaining suitable for a schoolteacher's position. The day of the festival dawned clear and crisp, with the vibrant colors of autumn painting the surrounding countryside. The entire town gathered in the large meadow behind the church, where tables groaned with harvest bounty and a wooden platform had been constructed for dancing. Children raced about playing games organized by older girls, while men competed in traditional contests of strength and skill. Ethan called for Daisy promptly at noon, his injured arm no longer requiring a sling, though he still moved it cautiously. He had dressed with evident care in a new dark suit and crisp white shirt, his usually untamed hair tamed somewhat for the occasion. "You look beautiful," he said simply when Daisy emerged from her room, the new dress fitting perfectly thanks to Martha's skilled alterations. "Thank you. You're quite handsome yourself." The compliment came easily, without the self-consciousness that had marked their earlier interactions. Martha shooed them toward the door with a satisfied smile. "Go on, you two. Enjoy yourselves. I'll be along later with my pies for the judging." The festival was already in full swing when they arrived, and Daisy found herself warmly greeted by her pupils and their parents. The tentative acceptance she had initially received had blossomed into genuine welcome, as the community recognized her dedication to their children's education. Even Rebecca, Palmer, offered a civil nod, though her gaze lingered speculatively on Ethan's hand, resting lightly at Daisy's waist. The gesture was proprietary in a way that should have alarmed Daisy, but instead filled her with unexpected contentment. They wandered among the various activities, Ethan proudly introducing Daisy to those she hadn't yet met, his manner making clear to all that their association was more than casual friendship. By mid-afternoon, when the fiddlers struck up a lively tune for dancing, the entire town seemed to have accepted them as a couple. "Shall we?" Ethan asked, gesturing toward the dance platform where couples were already assembling. "Your shoulder," Daisy began, "is well enough for dancing," he assured her, "unless you're concerned about your reputation being linked with an injured lawman." The teasing question held an undertone of genuine inquiry, and Daisy answered honestly, "I'm more concerned about causing you pain." The only pain would be watching others dance with you while I stand aside, Ethan replied, offering his hand. I promise to tell you if it becomes uncomfortable. The dance was a spirited Virginia reel that left them both breathless and laughing. Ethan showed no sign of discomfort, despite the energetic movements, and Daisy allowed herself to enjoy the moment fully, setting aside the persistent worries that usually shadowed her thoughts. As afternoon mellowed toward evening, lanterns were lit around the meadow, casting a golden glow over the continuing festivities. A bonfire blazed at the center of the gathering, and children toasted apples on long sticks under watchful parental supervision. "Walk with me," Ethan suggested as the music paused between sets. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curious, Daisy agreed, allowing him to lead her away from the crowded meadow toward a gentle rise overlooking the gathering. A massive oak tree stood sentinel at the hilltop, its branches spread wide and still clinging to autumn-hued leaves. "This is my favorite view of Florissant," Ethan explained as they reached the tree. "You can see the whole town from here, especially at sunset." Indeed, the vista was spectacular. The small town nestled in the valley below, church steeple rising above surrounding buildings, while farmland stretched beyond in patchwork patterns of harvested fields and autumn foliage. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, the beauty almost painful in its perfection. "It's breathtaking," Daisy murmured, genuinely moved by the scene. "I come here sometimes to remember why I chose this place," Ethan said quietly, standing close beside her. "After the war, I couldn't settle anywhere. Drifted for almost 2 years before finding Florissant. Something about this view convinced me to stay." "I understand," Daisy replied, thinking of her own journey and the moment she had first seen Florissant from the stage-coach window, something in its peaceful aspect calling to her weary spirit. "Some places speak to the soul." Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Daisy, there's something I need to say." Her heart quickened at his tone, anticipation and apprehension mingling. "Yes. I know you've been cautious about forming attachments here. I respect that, and I've tried to be patient." He took her hand gently. "But my feelings for you have grown beyond what I can contain in friendship alone." Daisy's breath caught at the direct declaration. "Ethan, please, let me finish," he requested softly. "I understand there are parts of your past you're not ready to share. I don't need to know everything to know who you are now, a brave, intelligent, compassionate woman who has brought light into my life in ways I never expected." Tears pricked at Daisy's eyes at his words, so close to what Martha had said about defining herself by present actions rather than past events. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered. "If you knew, whatever brought you to Florissant doesn't change what I see before me every day," he insisted, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "I'm falling in love with you, Daisy Sullivan. I think perhaps I began falling that first day in the town square when you collapsed into my arms." The confession, spoken plainly without artifice or guile, shattered something within Daisy, the careful wall she had built around her heart since fleeing Boston. Tears spilled down her cheeks as emotions too long suppressed broke free. "I don't deserve your love," she managed. "You don't know who I really am." "Then tell me," he said simply, releasing her hand to gently wipe away her tears. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The offer was tempting beyond measure, the promise of shared burden after so long carrying her secrets alone. Yet fear still held her back. "I can't. Not yet. There are complications that might put you in an impossible position as sheriff." Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. "You're running from something or someone." It wasn't a question, and denial seemed pointless. "Yes. Is it legal trouble?" His tone remained gentle without judgment, Not exactly, she hedged, but it's dangerous. Ethan considered this, his expression thoughtful rather than alarmed. Are you in danger now? Is that why you've been watching the stagecoach deliveries so carefully? Daisy stared at him, startled by his observation. You notice that? I notice everything about you, he admitted. It's becoming something of an occupational hazard. Despite the seriousness of their conversation, a small smile tugged at her lips. Very observant, Sheriff. It's my job. His own smile faded as he continued. Daisy, whatever you're facing, I want to help. Not just as the sheriff, but as a man who cares deeply for you. The sincerity in his voice nearly undid her resolve. How easy it would be to confess everything, to trust this good man with her darkest secrets. Yet the risk remained not just to herself, but to him as well. If Harold Sullivan's associates traced her to Florissant, Ethan's position as sheriff would make him a target. I need time, she said finally, to be certain that the past is truly behind me. Can you understand that? Ethan studied her face for a long moment before nodding slowly. I can. But I want you to know that whenever you're ready to share that burden, I'll be here to help carry it. He hesitated, then added, and in the meantime, may I court you properly, as befits a lady of your standing in our community. The formal request, so earnest and traditional, touched Daisy deeply. Despite her reservations, she couldn't deny what her heart already knew: she was falling in love with Ethan Lockwood, against all caution and wisdom. Yes, she whispered. I would like that very much. Relief and joy transformed his features. Slowly, giving her ample time to withdraw, Ethan leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that began gently but deepened, as Daisy responded, her hands moving to rest against his chest as his good arm encircled her waist. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving them in the soft glow of twilight. Below in the meadow, lanterns blazed brighter against the gathering darkness, and the sounds of music and laughter drifted up to their hilltop sanctuary. We should return, Daisy said reluctantly, before we're missed. Ethan nodded, though he seemed equally disinclined to end their private moment. May I call on you tomorrow? Perhaps we could ride out to the lake if the weather holds. I'd like that, Daisy replied, happiness bubbling within her despite the lingering shadows of her secrets. As they made their way back to the festival, Ethan's hand warm around hers, Daisy allowed herself to hope that perhaps her past truly was behind her, that the fresh start she had sought in Florissant might include not just safety and purpose, but love as well. The following weeks brought a deepening of their relationship, as Ethan courted Daisy with old-fashioned propriety that nevertheless couldn't disguise the growing passion between them. Sunday afternoons were spent riding through the countryside or walking along the small river that bordered the town. Evenings often found them sharing supper at Martha's table or attending community gatherings together. Daisy's position as schoolteacher was confirmed permanently after her successful trial period, with the school board unanimously approving her appointment and even allocating additional funds for new textbooks at her request. The children thrived under her guidance, and parents commented regularly on their improved interest in learning. As autumn deepened toward winter, Daisy began to relax her vigilance slightly. 3 mail deliveries had come and gone with no inquiries about a woman matching her description, no telegrams seeking information about newcomers from Boston. Perhaps Harold Sullivan's associates had abandoned the search, deciding she wasn't worth the effort of tracking across the country. This tentative security allowed her to consider a future in Florissant with growing confidence. Her feelings for Ethan had developed into a deep, abiding love that both frightened and exhilarated her. Yet still she hesitated to share the full truth of her past, fear of losing his respect, and potentially her freedom holding her back. The decision was taken from her hands on a crisp December morning as Daisy supervised her students' arrival at the schoolhouse. A stranger stood observing from across the street, a well-dressed man with the unmistakable bearing of an Easterner. Something in his posture sent a chill through Daisy even before he turned fully toward her, revealing a face she recognized with sickening clarity. James Harrington, Harold Sullivan's business partner and the man from whom she had fled. Daisy froze momentarily, blood draining from her face as their eyes met across the distance. Harrington's expression shifted from casual interest to sharp recognition, confirming her worst fears. He had found her. With forced composure, Daisy ushered the remaining children inside, instructing her oldest pupil to begin the morning reading exercises. Once the door closed behind her, she leaned against it, mind racing through limited options. Running again seemed the only choice, yet the thought of abandoning her students, Martha's kindness, and especially Ethan tore at her heart. A knock at the schoolhouse door startled her from these desperate thoughts. Taking a deep breath to compose herself, Daisy opened it expecting to face Harrington's threats. Instead, Ethan stood on the threshold, concern evident in his expression. "Are you all right?" he asked immediately. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Daisy glanced past him to the spot where Harrington had stood, finding it empty. Had she imagined his presence? No, the cold certainty in her gut told her otherwise. He was here in Florissant and he would return. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely audible, "I need to speak with you. Urgently." "But not here, not now." Understanding instantly, he nodded. "After school. I'll arrange for Martha to watch your class for the afternoon session. Meet me at the sheriff's office at noon." Gratitude washed through her at his immediate acceptance of her need. "Thank you." The morning passed in a haze of anxiety, as Daisy attempted to focus on her teaching duties, while constantly scanning the schoolhouse windows for signs of Harrington. By noon, her nerves were stretched to breaking point, and she gratefully released the children to Martha's supervision for their afternoon arithmetic lesson. The walk to the sheriff's office seemed interminable, each step bringing her closer to a confession she had hoped never to make. Yet there was no choice now. Harrington's presence meant danger not just for herself, but potentially for the entire community that had welcomed her. Ethan was waiting in his private office, having cleared his schedule for the afternoon. He rose as she entered, concern deepening the lines around his eyes. "What's happened, Daisy?" "He's found me," she said simply, sinking into the chair opposite his desk. "A man from Boston. I saw him watching the schoolhouse this morning." Ethan's expression sharpened. "Who is he? What does he want?" "His name is James Harrington. He was my late husband's business partner." The familiar lie tasted bitter now, knowing it must be the last time she would use it with Ethan. "Except Harold Sullivan wasn't my husband, and he isn't dead at least. He wasn't when I fled Boston 7 months ago." The revelation hung in the air between them. Ethan's face remained carefully neutral as he resumed his seat. "I'm listening." Taking a deep breath, Daisy began the story she had concealed for so long. "My father was a professor at Harvard. After my brother died at Antietam, he changed, began drinking heavily, neglecting his duties. My mother fell ill with consumption, requiring expensive treatments. When father lost his position, our financial situation became desperate." She stared at her hands, unable to meet Ethan's gaze as she continued. "Harold Sullivan was a wealthy banker who had expressed interest in me at social functions. He offered a bargain marriage to him in exchange for paying my mother's medical expenses and settling my father's debts. I accepted, seeing no alternative. Go on, Ethan prompted quietly when she faltered. The marriage was difficult from the beginning. Harold was controlling, possessive. He isolated me from friends, forced me to abandon my teaching position. When my mother died despite the treatments, I had nothing left but the arrangement I'd made. Unconsciously, her hand rose to her throat, where faint scars remained hidden beneath her high collar. He became violent when drinking. At first just harsh words, then worse. Ethan's knuckles whitened as his hands clenched on the desk, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. I endured for nearly 2 years, believing I had no choice, no escape. Then I discovered the true source of Harold's wealth. Daisy's voice hardened. His banking business was largely a front. His real income came from illegal gambling operations, prostitution, loan sharking activities managed with his partner, James Harrington. Did you report this to authorities? Ethan asked, his professional demeanor asserting itself. Daisy laughed bitterly. The Boston police captain dined at our home regularly. Many officials received generous contributions from Harold's organizations. When I confronted Harold about his criminal activities, her voice faltered. He nearly killed me. Would have if our housekeeper hadn't intervened. Rising from his chair, Ethan moved around the desk to kneel beside her, taking her trembling hands in his. You don't need to continue if it's too difficult. No, you need to understand everything, she insisted. While recovering from that beating, I planned my escape. I took money from Harold's safe money I justified as repayment for my years of suffering. Enough to travel west and establish myself somewhere new. I left at night, using my mother's maiden name, Sullivan, and her wedding ring to support my widow's story. Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. That's why you've been watching for telegrams and strangers. You're afraid of being found. Daisy nodded. Harold would never accept being abandoned or robbed. The money matters little to him, it's the defiance he can't tolerate. He sent Harrington to find me, to bring me back, or... She swallowed hard. Or ensure I couldn't testify about his operations. And now Harrington is here in Florissant, Ethan concluded, his expression grim. Did he speak to you? No. I saw him watching the schoolhouse. He recognized me, I'm certain of it. Daisy finally met Ethan's gaze directly, fear evident in her eyes. I need to leave, Ethan, immediately. Harrington is dangerous, and I won't risk bringing harm to you or anyone else in town. Ethan's grip on her hands tightened. You're not going anywhere alone, he stated firmly. This is exactly the situation sheriffs are meant to handle, Daisy, protecting innocent citizens from criminals. You don't understand, she protested. These men have connections, resources. They bribe officials, eliminate witnesses. Even if you arrested Harrington, others would come. Then we'll face them too, Ethan replied with quiet conviction. Florissant isn't Boston. We handle our own troubles here. Hope and doubt warred within Daisy. How can you be so certain? You don't know what they're capable of. I fought through 4 years of war, Daisy. I've seen mankind's capacity for violence up close. His expression softened as he touched her cheek gently. But I've also seen courage in the face of fear. You exhibited tremendous bravery leaving that situation, surviving on your own, building a new life. I won't let anyone take that from you. Tears welled in Daisy's eyes at his unwavering support. You aren't disgusted by my deception. Living here under false pretenses, lying about my past. You did what was necessary to survive, Ethan said simply. I might wish you'd trusted me sooner, but I understand why you couldn't. He rose, moving back behind his desk with renewed purpose. Now we need a plan. First priority is ensuring your safety while we deal with Harrington. Daisy stared at him, bewildered by his matter-of-fact acceptance of her confession. You still want to help me, even knowing everything? Ethan looked up from the paper where he'd begun making notes, surprise evident in his expression. Of course I do. Did you think I'd turn you away? I deceived you. I deceived everyone in town. You protected yourself the only way you knew how, he corrected gently. And now you've trusted me with the truth, which means we can address this situation properly. His lips curved in a determined smile. Besides, I told you I was falling in love with you, Daisy. Learning your real name or circumstances doesn't change who you are, the woman I've come to know these past months. Fresh tears spilled down Daisy's cheeks at this declaration. Diana, she whispered. My real name is Diana Parker. Ethan considered this for a moment before nodding. Diana Parker. It suits you. Then, with characteristic practicality, he returned to the matter at hand. Now, about Harrington. I need a description, his likely whereabouts, and any information about his habits or methods. For the next hour, they formulated a strategy. Ethan would locate Harrington, confront him officially as sheriff, and make clear that Diana was under the protection of Florissant's law. Meanwhile, Diana would stay with Martha, never alone, while Ethan's deputy kept watch on the schoolhouse and boarding house. If necessary, I'll contact the federal marshal, Ethan added. Harrington's criminal activities cross state lines, which puts them under federal jurisdiction. As their planning concluded, Diana felt a strange mixture of terror and relief. The secret she had carried for so long was finally shared, and Ethan's continued support offered hope she had scarcely dared imagine. Yet Harrington's presence remained a deadly threat, one that could destroy everything she had built in Florissant. I should return to the school, she said finally, rising from her chair. The children, Martha has them well in hand for today, Ethan assured her. I'll escort you back to the boarding house. Pack whatever you need for a few days. You'll stay at Reverend Carter's home until this is resolved. His house is more defensible than Martha's, and Mrs. Carter will welcome the company. Diana hesitated, then nodded, accepting his judgment. As they left the sheriff's office, Ethan's hand rested protectively at the small of her back, a gesture that both comforted and concerned her. His determination to protect her was evident, but she feared what might happen if Harrington decided to eliminate obstacles to his mission. Their fears proved well-founded sooner than anticipated. As they neared Martha's boarding house, a figure stepped from between buildings to block their path. James Harrington, impeccably dressed as always, his cold smile familiar enough to send ice through Diana's veins. Mrs. Sullivan, he drawled, emphasizing the false name with obvious derision. Or should I say, Miss Parker, how delightful to find you in such rustic surroundings. Ethan moved subtly, positioning himself between Diana and Harrington. James Harrington, I'm Sheriff Ethan Lockwood. I understand you're new to Florissant. Harrington's gaze shifted to Ethan, assessing him with calculated interest. Sheriff, how quaint. Yes, I arrived only yesterday on business. His smile never reached his eyes. Private business with this lady specifically? Any business you have with Mrs. Sullivan can be conducted through me, Ethan replied evenly, though Diana could sense the tension in his posture. As sheriff, I take an interest in strangers who disturb our citizens. Citizen, Harrington laughed. Is that what she's calling herself now? This woman is a thief and a fugitive, Sheriff. She stole a considerable sum from her legitimate husband and fled her marital obligations. I'm here to return her to Boston to face appropriate consequences. Diana stepped forward despite Ethan's protective stance. You have no authority here, James. And we both know Harold's interest isn't in the money. Perhaps not primarily, Harrington conceded, though $10,000 is hardly insignificant. Ethan's eyebrows rose slightly at the amount, but his expression remained impassive. "Mr. Harrington, I suggest you check into our hotel and remain there while I verify these allegations." Attempting to remove Mrs. Sullivan from Florissant without legal documentation would constitute kidnapping under Missouri law. Harrington's pleasant facade slipped momentarily, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "I have no intention of breaking any laws, Sheriff. I merely wish to persuade Diana to return voluntarily to her husband. Perhaps we could discuss this privately." He glanced meaningfully at Diana. "Family matters, you understand." "Mrs. Sullivan has made her position clear," Ethan stated firmly. "Any further communication can be directed through my office. Now, I suggest you return to your accommodations while I look into this matter." The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Harrington inclined his head slightly. "As you wish, Sheriff, but I should mention Harold is a man of considerable influence. His patience with this situation is wearing thin." His gaze shifted to Diana. "Remember our conversation about consequences, my dear. Some actions cannot be undone." The veiled threat hung in the air as Harrington turned and walked away, his casual stride belying the menace of his words. Only when he had disappeared around a corner did Diana release the breath she'd been holding, her knees suddenly weak with reaction. Ethan's arm came around her waist, steadying her. "Let's get you inside," he murmured. "We need to accelerate our plans." Martha was waiting anxiously, having been informed of the situation in broad terms when Ethan arranged for her to cover Diana's teaching duties. Her practical nature asserted itself immediately as she helped Diana gather necessary belongings while Ethan conferred with his deputy who had arrived shortly after them. "The Reverend and Mrs. Carter are expecting you," Martha assured Diana, packing nightclothes into a small valise. "Their house is sturdy as a fort, with only 2 entrances easily watched. You'll be safe there while Ethan handles this unsavory business." Diana paused in folding a shirtwaist, sudden doubt overwhelming her. "Perhaps I should just leave, Martha." "Go further west where neither Harold nor his men would bother searching." The older woman fixed her with a stern look. "Running solved nothing the first time, child. It only delayed the inevitable confrontation." Her expression softened. "Besides, you have something worth fighting for now. Something you didn't have in Boston." "Ethan," Diana whispered, the name encompassing not just the man but everything he represented: safety, community, the possibility of genuine love. "Ethan," Martha agreed. "And the life you've built here, the children who look up to you. Friends who value your presence." She clasped Diana's hands firmly. "You belong in Florissant now. We protect our own." The simple declaration brought fresh tears to Diana's eyes. How long had it been since she truly belonged anywhere? Since before Thomas's death, perhaps when her family had been whole and her future seemed bright with promise. Ethan returned as they finished packing, his expression grave but determined. "Deputy Wilson will remain here tonight in case Harrington gets any ideas about searching your room. Reverend Carter is waiting with his buggy at the rear entrance." He lifted the valise, his manner gentle despite the urgency of their situation. "Ready," Diana nodded, embracing Martha briefly before following Ethan through the kitchen to the back door where Reverend Carter waited as promised. The elderly minister helped her into the buggy with grandfatherly solicitude, while Ethan conferred quietly with him about security arrangements. As they drove through back streets toward the parsonage, Diana gazed at the town she had come to love, the schoolhouse where she had found purpose again, the church where she had begun to heal, the town square where her journey in Florissant had begun with a collapse that had literally delivered her into Ethan's arms. The symmetry seemed both poetic and precarious now, with everything she had built threatened by Harrington's arrival. The Carters welcomed her with genuine warmth, Mrs. Carter fussing over her pale complexion and insisting on tea and fresh biscuits despite the unusual circumstances. Their calm acceptance of the situation steadied Diana's nerves somewhat, as did Ethan's methodical approach to security checking windows, arranging signals with his deputy, ensuring clear lines of sight from the house. "I need to return to town," he said finally, standing with Diana in the parsonage small study while the Carters prepared the guest room. "Harrington will make his next move soon, and I want to be prepared." Diana gripped his hands, fear clawing at her throat. "Be careful, Ethan. He's more dangerous than he appears." "So am I," Ethan replied with quiet confidence. "I didn't survive Shiloh and Gettysburg by being careless." He touched her cheek gently. "Trust me, Diana, I won't let him take you." The use of her real name, spoken with such certainty and affection, steadied her. "I do trust you, more than I've trusted anyone in years." He leaned forward, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. "Rest if you can. I'll return in the morning with news." After Ethan departed, Diana tried to follow his advice, but sleep proved elusive despite Mrs. Carter's herbal tea and comfortable guest accommodations. Every sound from outside sent her heart racing, expecting Harrington's inevitable attempt to circumvent Ethan's precautions. Dawn found her exhausted but vigilant, having dozed fitfully between periods of anxious wakefulness. Mrs. Carter brought breakfast on a tray, her motherly concern evident in additional portions and careful attention to Diana's favorite preserves. "The sheriff sent word early this morning," she informed Diana. "All was quiet through the night. He'll come himself once he's confirmed Mr. Harrington's whereabouts." Relief coursed through Diana at this news. Perhaps Harrington had recognized the difficulty of his position and decided to return to Boston empty-handed. It seemed unlikely given his reputation for persistence, but hope was a powerful force after a night of fear. Ethan arrived mid-morning, his expression troublingly grim despite his reassuring smile for Diana. After exchanging pleasantries with the Carters, he asked for privacy to speak with her, which Reverend Carter granted with understanding. "What is it?" Diana asked once they were alone. "Has something happened?" Harrington checked out of the hotel before dawn, Ethan reported. "No one saw him leave town, which means he's either hiding somewhere in Florissant or traveling cross-country to avoid notice." Diana's momentary hope deflated. "He wouldn't leave so easily." "Not after tracking me all this way." "I agree." Ethan paced the small room, his frustration evident. "I've sent inquiries to neighboring towns and alerted the stagecoach drivers to watch for him, but—" He hesitated, clearly reluctant to share his suspicions. "But you think he's still here, planning something," Diana finished for him. Ethan nodded slowly. "His threat about consequences concerns me. Men like Harrington don't make idle threats." "No, they don't," Diana agreed, her mind racing through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. "The school," she said suddenly, cold certainty gripping her heart. "The children would be the perfect leverage." Understanding dawned immediately in Ethan's eyes. "I've had Deputy Wilson watching the schoolhouse, but we should check again." The children won't be there until Monday, but a commotion outside interrupted him, horses arriving at speed, urgent voices calling for the Reverend. Ethan moved to the window, his posture stiffening as he observed the scene. "It's Mayor Thompson and Dr. Miller. Something's wrong." They hurried to the front parlor where Reverend Carter was already speaking with the new arrivals, his expression grave. All three men turned as Ethan and Diana entered, their faces confirming her worst fears even before Mayor Thompson spoke. "There's been a fire at the schoolhouse, Sheriff. Started just before dawn by all accounts, Martha Winters discovered it on her morning walk. "Martha," Deanna gasped. She's unharmed," Dr. Miller assured her quickly. "Showed remarkable presence of mind, in fact. Organized a bucket brigade that saved the main church structure, though the school annex is." He trailed off, his expression conveying what words could not. "Destroyed," Mayor Thompson finished bluntly. "Nothing left but charred timbers and ash." Ethan's jaw tightened, anger darkening his features. Was Deputy Wilson there? He was supposed to be watching the building. The mayor and doctor exchanged troubled glances before Thompson replied. "Wilson was found unconscious behind the church, blow to the head. He's at the doctor's office now, still dazed but expected to recover." "Harrington," Ethan growled, the single word laden with fury and certainty. Diana sank into the nearest chair, trembling as the implications became clear. This was the consequence. Harrington had threatened destruction of her livelihood, her contribution to the community. A message that nowhere was beyond his reach, nothing she valued safe from Harold Sullivan's vengeance. "I don't understand," Reverend Carter said, looking between them with confusion. "Who would deliberately burn our schoolhouse? We have no enemies here." Briefly, Ethan explained the situation, omitting personal details but making clear the connection between Harrington's threats and the fire. The Reverend listened with growing concern, while Mayor Thompson's expression shifted from shock to determination. "If this outsider thinks he can terrorize our town and harm our schoolteacher, he's gravely mistaken," Thompson declared, his usual jovial manner replaced by civic outrage. "The town council will post a reward for information leading to his arrest. And as for the school, we'll rebuild, better than before." The immediate support warmed Diana's heart even as fear continued to course through her. "Thank you, Mayor Thompson, but I'm afraid this won't end with the schoolhouse. Harrington won't stop until he's accomplished his mission. Then we must ensure he fails," Reverend Carter stated with surprising firmness. "Sheriff, what do you recommend?" Ethan considered for a moment before answering. "We need to draw Harrington out, force him to make a move where we control the circumstances rather than waiting for his next attack." "How?" Deanna asked, already dreading the answer. "By using what he wants most as bait," Ethan replied, his expression apologetic but resolved. The plan they developed was daring but calculated, designed to exploit Harrington's arrogance while minimizing risk to Diana and the community. Word would be spread that Diana intended to leave Florissant by the evening stagecoach, returning to Boston to face her husband and clear her name. She would appear to travel alone, but Ethan and several trusted men would shadow her movements, ready to intervene when Harrington made his inevitable attempt to intercept her. "It's too dangerous," Diana protested when Ethan outlined the strategy. "If anything goes wrong, nothing will go wrong," he assured her with more confidence than she suspected he felt. "We'll have men positioned at every possible interception point. Harrington won't expect an ambush. He thinks he's the predator here." Despite her misgivings, Deanna recognized the logic of the plan. Harrington would never cease hunting her while she remained in Florissant, and the community would suffer further attacks in his attempt to flush her out. Better to confront the threat directly, on their terms, than live in perpetual fear. The remainder of the day passed in tense preparation. Deanna returned briefly to Martha's boarding house, to pack visibly for her supposed departure, making sure Harrington's inevitable informants would witness her activities. Martha, fully briefed on the plan, played her role perfectly, expressing loud disappointment at Diana's decision to leave while helping her prepare for the journey. By late afternoon, Diana waited in the stagecoach office, conspicuously alone with her valise beside her on the bench. The regular driver had been replaced by one of Ethan's trusted friends, and Mayor Thompson sat ostensibly reading a newspaper nearby, a loaded shotgun concealed beneath his coat. Ethan himself was nowhere visible, having positioned himself along the road where the ambush was most likely to occur. As the appointed departure time approached, Diana's nerves stretched to breaking point. What if Harrington had seen through their ruse? What if he chose a different approach entirely? The possibilities for disaster seemed endless as she sat rigidly in the quiet office, waiting for a drama whose script she could not predict. The stagecoach arrived precisely on schedule, and Diana boarded with affected reluctance, glancing back at the town as though memorizing its features one last time. Mayor Thompson nodded almost imperceptibly as she settled into her seat, everything proceeding as planned. The driver called to the horses, and the coach lurched forward, beginning its journey out of Florissant. For the first mile, nothing unusual occurred. Diana peered anxiously through the window at the passing landscape, trying to identify Ethan's men among the trees and rocky outcroppings that lined the road. The coach contained no other passengers, a deliberate arrangement to minimize risk to uninvolved citizens. They had just rounded a bend where the road narrowed between steep embankments when the attack came not from hiding places along the route as expected, but from inside the coach itself. A panel in the roof that Diana had assumed was for ventilation suddenly slid aside, and before she could react, James Harrington dropped into the seat opposite her, a small pistol aimed directly at her heart. "Hello, Diana," he said pleasantly, as though they had encountered each other at a Boston social function rather than a staged ambush. "I thought we might have a private conversation before your devoted sheriff intervenes." Terror froze Diana momentarily as she realized their careful planning had been anticipated and countered. "How did I know about your little trap?" Harrington finished for her, smiling coldly. "Small towns are charming but dreadfully indiscreet. Your mayor's deputy mentioned the plan to his wife, who told the milliner, who mentioned it to a customer while I happened to be purchasing a hat next door." He shook his head in mock disappointment. "Amateur theatrics, my dear. Harold would be embarrassed for you." Outside, Diana could hear shouts as Ethan's men realized something had gone wrong. The coach continued moving, the driver evidently unaware of the intrusion from above. "What now, James?" Diana asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You can't possibly escape with me. The entire town knows who you are and what you've done." "A minor inconvenience," he replied with chilling confidence. "By nightfall, we'll be on a train east, and this backwater will be nothing but an unpleasant memory for both of us." His expression hardened. "Unless, of course, you'd prefer I use this." He gestured with the pistol. "Harold would be disappointed, but he's prepared for that possibility as well." Diana's mind raced, searching for options. If she screamed, Harrington might shoot her immediately. If she remained silent, she would soon be beyond Ethan's reach. Neither alternative seemed acceptable. "Harold sent you to kill me," she realized suddenly, the truth crystallizing as she studied Harrington's expression. "He never intended me to return alive." Something flickered in Harrington's eyes, surprise, perhaps, at her perception. "Harold's feelings are complicated. He'd prefer you alive if possible, but not at the cost of his reputation or freedom. Your knowledge of our operations has become a liability he can no longer afford." "Then why this elaborate chase? Why not simply have me killed in St. Louis or Kansas City as I traveled west?" "Because Harold is a sentimental man in his way," Harrington replied with a shrug. "He wanted to look into your eyes one last time, to hear you beg forgiveness before the end. Now that option is regrettably off the table." The stagecoach slowed unexpectedly, jostling them both as the driver navigated a rough patch of road. Harrington glanced briefly toward the window, his attention diverted for a crucial second. Deanna seized the opportunity, launching herself across the narrow space between them and driving her shoulder into his chest. Surprised by the attack, Harrington's finger tightened reflexively on the trigger. The pistol discharged with a deafening report in the confined space, the bullet splintering the wooden panel beside Deanna's head as they grappled for control of the weapon. Despite her determination, Harrington's superior strength quickly asserted itself. He shoved her back against the opposite seat, pistol once again trained on her, his composure now replaced by cold anger. "That was exceedingly foolish," he snarled, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek where her fingernails had scored his skin. "Harold's sentimentality be damned. This ends now." Before he could pull the trigger again, the stagecoach lurched violently to a halt, throwing them both forward. The door was wrenched open with such force that the hinges protested, revealing Ethan, his own revolver aimed steadily at Harrington. "Drop the weapon," he commanded, his voice deadly calm, "or the next sound you hear will be your last." Harrington froze, calculating his odds with the rapid assessment of a man accustomed to dangerous situations. The pistol wavered slightly before he smiled thinly and began to lower it. "It seems I've underestimated the frontier justice system, Sheriff. My compliments on your timing." The apparent surrender was so smooth that only Diana, knowing Harrington's methods, recognized the deception before it manifested. As the pistol lowered, his other hand moved toward his vest pocket where, she knew with sickening certainty, he kept a derringer for precisely such emergencies. "Ethan, his pocket," she cried, lunging forward to grab Harrington's arm. The warning came barely in time. Ethan fired as Harrington's hand emerged with the small backup weapon, the sheriff's bullet striking Harrington's shoulder and spinning him back against the coach seat. The derringer clattered to the floor as blood bloomed across Harrington's expensive suit coat. "You provincial fool," Harrington gasped, clutching his wounded shoulder. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with, the connections I have? You've just signed your own death warrant." Ethan kept his revolver trained on the wounded man as Deputy Wilson and several townsmen appeared behind him, drawn by the gunshots. "Get him out of there," he ordered, carefully. "He's still dangerous." As they dragged Harrington from the coach, Ethan's attention shifted to Deanna, his expression softening with concern. "Are you hurt?" "I heard the shot. I'm unharmed," she assured him, though her hands trembled violently with reaction. "He intended to kill me, Ethan. Harold never meant for me to return to Boston alive." Ethan holstered his weapon and helped her from the coach, his arm steady around her waist as her knees threatened to buckle. "It's over now. He'll stand trial for attempted murder, assault on a peace officer, arson, enough charges to keep him imprisoned for decades." Deanna shook her head, fear still gripping her despite Harrington's capture. "You don't understand. Even in prison, he has connections. Harold will send others when he learns of James's failure. Then we'll deal with them too," Ethan stated with quiet determination. "And in the meantime, we'll be contacting federal authorities about Harold Sullivan's criminal enterprises. Your testimony could dismantle his entire operation." The suggestion sent fresh terror through Deanna. "Testify against Harold. That would place an even larger target on my back. Or it might be the only way to truly free yourself," Ethan countered gently. "As long as Harold remains powerful, you'll never stop looking over your shoulder. But if his organization falls, if he faces justice for his crimes—" The possibility seemed remote, yet tantalizing. A complete resolution, rather than the temporary reprieve she had sought in fleeing west. It would be dangerous, she murmured, more to herself than Ethan, for everyone involved. Life often is, he replied simply, but some risks are worth taking. His gaze held her steadily, the words carrying meaning beyond their immediate situation. Some connections worth protecting, whatever the cost. In that moment, surrounded by townspeople who had rallied to her defense despite her deceptions, Diana felt something shift within her, fear giving way to a steely resolve she had thought beaten out of her during her years with Harold. Ethan was right. Running had provided temporary safety but no true freedom. Perhaps facing the threat directly was the only path to a life no longer defined by fear. "I'll testify," she decided, her voice strengthening with each word. "If federal authorities can ensure some protection, I'll tell them everything I know about Harold's operations." Ethan's smile conveyed pride and something deeper that made her heart quicken despite their dire circumstances. "That's my brave Diana." The aftermath of Harrington's capture unfolded with surprising swiftness. Ethan's telegram to federal authorities in St. Louis brought a marshal to Florissant within days, accompanied by agents investigating interstate criminal operations. Diana's detailed testimony about Harold Sullivan's various enterprises provided the evidence they had sought for years, but lacked credible witnesses to support. Harrington, recovering from his wound in Florissant's small jail, found his usual connections powerless against federal charges. His attempt to bribe his way to freedom failed when Mayor Thompson indignantly reported the offer to authorities, resulting in additional charges. Faced with mounting evidence and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, Harrington eventually agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for consideration during sentencing. Throughout these legal proceedings, the community rallied around Diana with unexpected support. Rather than rejecting her for the deceptions necessary to her survival, they embraced her more fully upon learning the truth of her circumstances. Work began immediately on rebuilding the schoolhouse, with donations of materials and labor pouring in from throughout the county. Martha insisted Diana continue residing at the boarding house, declaring fiercely that no Boston gangster would intimidate her household. Reverend Carter held special services praying for Diana's safety and the community's healing, while his wife organized meals and practical assistance that demonstrated Florissant's solidarity in crisis. Most steadfast of all was Ethan, whose unwavering support never faltered despite the potential danger association with Diana might bring. His protection extended beyond physical security to emotional fortification, his quiet confidence bolstering her courage when testimony or legal complexities threatened to overwhelm her. 3 weeks after Harrington's arrest, news arrived that changed everything. Harold Sullivan had been apprehended in Boston following raids on his various businesses. The evidence provided by Diana and corroborated by Harrington had proven sufficient for federal indictments on numerous charges, effectively dismantling the criminal empire Harold had built over decades. "It's really over," Diana whispered, reading the telegram Ethan had brought to the boarding house. "I can hardly believe it." "Believe it," Ethan replied, his smile reflecting her own amazement. "The marshal says Sullivan is facing 20 years minimum. With his associates turning evidence against each other, the entire operation is collapsing." Relief washed through Diana in dizzying waves. For the first time in years, the future stretched before her, unburdened by fear or the need for vigilance. She could remain in Florissant not as a fugitive but as herself, Diana Parker, schoolteacher, community member, woman free to make her own choices, including, perhaps, the most important choice of all. Ethan seemed to sense the direction of her thoughts, his expression growing serious as he took her hands in his. "Deanna, throughout this ordeal, I've been hesitant to speak of personal matters when your safety was at risk. But now—" He paused, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Now that the danger has passed, I hope we might discuss our future." "Our future," she repeated softly, heart quickening. "Yes." He released her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that left no doubt about his intentions. "I told you once that I was falling in love with you. That feeling has only deepened with time and trials." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant ring with a small diamond nestled between two sapphires. "Deanna Parker, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy bubbled up within Deanna, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. After everything, the fear, the deceptions, the danger, to be offered such perfect happiness seemed almost beyond comprehension. "Yes," she managed through her emotion. "Yes, Ethan Lockwood, I would be honored to be your wife." His smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger was worth every hardship that had brought her to this moment. When he kissed her, Diana felt the last shadows of her past recede, replaced by the bright promise of a future built on truth, trust, and love. The rebuilding of Florissant schoolhouse became a community-wide project that symbolized renewal for both the town and its teacher. Men from throughout the county contributed labor, while women organized fundraising socials to purchase new books and materials. By spring, the structure stood complete, larger and sturdier than its predecessor, with expanded living quarters above for the schoolmistress, who would soon become the sheriff's wife. Diana and Ethan were married on a perfect May afternoon in the white church beside the new schoolhouse. Martha served as Diana's matron of honor, while Mayor Thompson stood as Ethan's best man. The entire town attended, celebrating not just the union of two beloved community members, but the triumph of courage and determination over adversity. As Deanna spoke her vows in the church filled with wildflowers and well-wishers, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed since that scorching July day when she had collapsed in Florissant's town square. The journey that had begun in desperation had led to joy beyond anything she could have imagined when fleeing Boston's shadows. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Carter declared, beaming at the couple before him. "Sheriff Lockwood, you may kiss your bride." Ethan's kiss was tender yet possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. As they turned to face their cheering friends and neighbors, Diana caught Martha's eye in the front pew. The older woman nodded once, satisfaction and affection clear in her expression. They both knew the truth that sometimes collapse was merely prelude to rebuilding, that endings often disguised beginnings, and that the heart, once truly awakened, could withstand any trial. 5 years later, Deanna stood on the porch of their home at the edge of Florissant, watching her husband approach on horseback with their 3-year-old son perched proudly before him in the saddle. Little Thomas Lockwood squealed with delight as his father urged the horse into a gentle trot for the final stretch of their ride, his chubby hands clutching the saddle horn while Ethan's strong arms kept him securely in place. Behind her, their infant daughter slept peacefully in the cradle Ethan had crafted himself, her delicate features already showing hints of her mother's determination. Martha would arrive soon to help with the children, while Deanna taught the afternoon session at the school where she still served as head teacher, having expanded the curriculum to include advanced studies for older students preparing for university. Ethan had continued as sheriff, though he now employed 2 deputies to handle routine matters, allowing him more time with his growing family. His reputation for integrity had spread throughout the region, leading to offers of political positions he consistently declined, preferring the direct service of law enforcement to the complications of governance. As Thomas spotted Diana and waved excitedly, she lifted her hand in greeting, heart swelling with contentment. The heat that had once felled her in Florissant's town square had ultimately delivered her not just to shade, but to the sheltering love of a good man in a community that had become truly home. "Mama, look," Thomas called as Ethan lifted him from the saddle. "Papa let me hold the reins." "Very impressive," Diana praised as her son ran to embrace her, his small body solid and warm against her skirts. "You'll be riding on your own before we know it." "Not too soon," Ethan cautioned, tying his horse to the hitching post before joining his family on the porch. He bent to kiss Diana, his lips warm against hers despite the brief contact. "How's our little lady today? Sleeping soundly after keeping me awake half the night," Diana replied with a rueful smile. "Martha should be here shortly. Will you be home for supper?" Ethan nodded, one arm circling her waist while Thomas danced around them, still excited from his adventure. Barring emergencies, the town's quiet these days. Quiet was relative in a growing community like Florissant, but true dangers had become rare over the years. Harold Sullivan remained imprisoned in a federal penitentiary, his criminal empire dismantled by the very authorities he had once bribed and intimidated. James Harrington had served 3 years before being transferred east to face additional charges in Boston, effectively removing both threats permanently from Diana's life. "I'm glad," Diana said simply, leaning into her husband's embrace as they watched Thomas chase a butterfly across the yard. "Though I sometimes miss the excitement of our early days together." Ethan chuckled, his breath warm against her hair. "Being shot at and ambushed by Boston criminals, an unusual form of nostalgia, Mrs. Lockwood." "Not that," she corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "The way you looked at me that first day in the town square, when I was nothing but a stranger who couldn't handle the Missouri heat. As though you saw something in me worth protecting even then." "I did," Ethan confirmed, his expression softening with memory and love. "Though I had no idea how completely you would transform my life." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch still sending ripples of awareness through her after all their years together. "Best collapse I ever witnessed." Diana laughed, rising on tiptoes to kiss him properly, heedless of their son's theatrical groans of disgust at his parents' display of affection. "Best rescue I ever experienced," she countered when they parted. "Thank you for carrying me to shade that day, Sheriff Lockwood." "My pleasure, Mrs. Lockwood," Ethan replied, his smile holding promises that had only deepened with time. "Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows." As Thomas tugged at their hands, demanding attention for his latest discovery in the garden, Diana silently echoed the sentiment. From heat and fear to shade and love, her journey had been unpredictable and often frightening. But standing here surrounded by the family she had once thought impossible, she wouldn't change a single step of the path that had brought her home.